Hey guys, tonight we begin somewhere quiet. You're standing just outside a small stone dwelling the edges of your sandals, pressing gently into warm, packed earth. The sun has recently dipped beneath the low Galilean hills, leaving behind streaks of dusty rose and faded lavender in the sky. The night is soft, but still, and the only sounds are the sigh of wind through fig trees and the distant bleat of a goat that refuses bedtime. Inside your home, the single oil lamp casts a flickering light over woven baskets, clay jugs, and a half-folded tunic laid neatly on a wooden stool. It's peaceful, at least on the outside, but in your chest something stirs. You've felt it for a while now, the disconnection. Not from people exactly, but from the way people live. You don't laugh at the same jokes anymore. Their parties feel loud and hollow. The gossip tastes sour, and no matter how much you try to snap out of it, you can't shake the sense that God has pulled you just slightly outside the circle. Now, just a gentle heads up, you probably wouldn't survive this era. There's no fan, no coffee, and definitely no online devotionals. It's just you, your sandals, and the slow, sacred silence where God speaks most clearly. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop your city and your local time in the comments. I think it's beautiful how we can all gather like this from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You sweep the floor slowly, the soft rasp of straw brushing stone in steady rhythm. And as you do, you notice again that familiar ache, not physical, but emotional, even spiritual. It's that subtle sense of being set apart. You love your friends, your family, your community, but you also feel like a stranger in your own story. The conversations don't satisfy. The small talk feels exhausting, and worst of all, you feel crazy for noticing. But you're not crazy. You're being called. You see, isolation is not punishment. In Scripture, isolation often precedes revelation. Moses spent 40 years in the desert before the burning bush ever spoke. Elijah sat under a broom tree alone and exhausted before he heard the whisper of God. And Jesus himself withdrew to lonely places to pray. There's a fringe teaching from early Christian mystics who believed that the wilderness wasn't a place of emptiness, but a place of spiritual gestation. That isolation wasn't absence, it was divine midwifery, a birthing place for destiny, and it sounds poetic until you're in it. You wake up one day and realize no one really understands you anymore. People say you've changed. They mean it as an insult, but you wonder if maybe, just maybe, they're right. You have changed. You're not as quick to argue, not as eager to be seen. You've grown quieter, not in defeat, but in discernment. John 15:19 comes to mind softly. If you belonged to the world, it would love you as its own. As it is, you do not belong to the world. It doesn't always feel like a gift, does it? Being set apart often feels more like being pushed aside. Historians still debate whether first-century Jewish communities believed solitude was holy or suspicious. Some rabbis praised the hermit's closeness to God. Others warned that too much solitude could invite spiritual danger. But maybe it's both. Maybe the line between danger and divine encounter is thin, and only the chosen are invited to walk it. And here's the quirky detail you didn't ask for. but might enjoy. Some scholars believe early desert dwellers would keep a small rock in their sandal to remind themselves of their humanity. A gentle discomfort that kept them grounded in humility while chasing heavenly things. You too feel that discomfort, don't you? Not physical, but spiritual. That ache behind your ribs that whispers, "This world is not my home." You try to explain it to someone, but it comes out clunky. "I just feel different," you say. And they nod politely, but their eyes glaze. They don't get it. How could they? They're not being called like you are. You pour water into a clay basin, watching it settle with a rippling hush. It's quiet tonight, but not empty. God often begins his greatest conversations in silence. And when you're chosen, he begins to pull you inward before pushing you forward. You rest your elbows on the table and look at the oil lamp. The flame dances gently, almost like it's breathing with you. A verse whispers from somewhere deep within you. Isaiah 30:15. In repentance and rest is your salvation in quietness, and trust is your strength. Quietness, trust. These aren't just comfort words, they're tools. Tools God places in the hands of those he is preparing. Because before he gives you a platform, he gives you stillness. Before he gives you people, he gives you solitude. Before he lets you be seen, he asks if you're willing to be hidden. And tonight, as you sit there with lentils simmering the sky, darkening, and peace beginning to return, you realize this isolation isn't punishment. It's preparation. You are not forgotten. You are being formed. So you breathe deeply. And for the first time in a long time, the breath doesn't tremble. The next morning comes quietly. The sun spills over the low hills like honey, thick and golden. A rooster, always a little too eager, announces the day, while your hands press warm dough into soft rounds beside the stone oven. There's comfort in the repetition, but your mind is elsewhere. It lingers on the names that used to fill your prayers and your life. You remember when your circle was bigger, when your days were filled with laughter, with shared meals with people who felt like forever. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, those connections began to loosen. Some drifted, some distanced, some disappeared entirely, and it hurt. You questioned yourself. Was I too intense, too religious? Did I do something wrong? But deep down in the quietest corners of your heart, a truth had already settled in. God was removing what couldn't go with you. It's hard to say it that way, removing as if they were things instead of people. But the truth is, not everyone is meant to walk every mile of your journey. Some were only meant for the beginning. And when your calling began to unfold, their part in your story quietly concluded. There's a verse that always feels like a gentle ache. Luke 14:26. If anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. It sounds harsh, doesn't it? But in its ancient context, hate wasn't emotional rage. It meant to choose less, to release, to loosen your grasp. And that's what you've been doing, even if you didn't realize it. You've been letting go. In Bible times, family wasn't just emotional support, it was survival. Your tribe determined your protection, your provision, even your place in society. Walking away from relationships meant walking into the unknown. So, when Jesus called his disciples to leave boats, businesses, and even bloodlines, it was scandalous. Historians still debate just how shocking those departures were. Some say families would publicly mourn those who followed Jesus as if they had died. Others argue that most returns were quiet, humble, and filled with both tears and relief. But regardless, the point remains being chosen often means being cut off. And sometimes that cut is spiritual before it's physical. You begin to notice the subtle tension, the way conversations with certain people grow shorter, more strained. The way they no longer ask how you really are. The way your spirit feels unsettled, even when your face is smiling. It's not bitterness. It's recognition. Some people aren't against you. They're just not for where you're going. There's a quirky teaching from some early Christian desert communities. They believed certain relationships, if clung to too tightly, could act as spiritual veils, blocking your clarity, muting God's voice, even interfering with your dreams. So, they'd fast not just from food, but from familiar faces. It sounds extreme until you live it. You sit by the olive tree in your courtyard, its trunk worn and knotted like an old rabbi's hands. A breeze carries the scent of crushed time, and your mind drifts to the ones you miss. You still love them. Of course you do, but the ache of loss is slowly being replaced by the peace of obedience. And that's not something the world always understands. There's a peculiar pain in losing people who are still alive. You see their lives on display, thriving, laughing, moving on, and it makes your heart ache. Not because you want to return, but because it confirms that God really did call you out. And that calling came with a cost. In one hand, you hold your purpose. In the other, absence. And both are holy. You whisper a verse as you rise to pour water for tea. Philippians 3:8. I consider everything a loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord. Everything a loss. Not just money, not just status, people, and yet you are still here, still standing, still growing. Because what felt like subtraction was actually sacred math. God wasn't leaving you empty. He was making room, and lately you've noticed something curious. You smile more genuinely even in solitude. You laugh without needing an audience. You pray not because someone told you to, but because silence without Him feels incomplete. This isn't loneliness. It's being set apart. One fringe historical detail you might appreciate: some early Hebrew women would weave symbolic knots into their head coverings, each one representing a prayer, a loss, or a blessing. And when the knots became too many to carry, they'd cut the thread and begin again. You feel that in your soul. The cutting, the starting over, and the sacred weight of what you're still carrying. Tonight, as the stars blink into place like tiny ancient witnesses, you sit by your small fire and let yourself grieve what's gone. Not with despair, but with reverence. Because you didn't lose for nothing. You were pruned for purpose. And your roots, they're growing deeper than ever. The sun sits higher now, warming the clay walls of your small courtyard as you press olives between smooth stones. Each slow grind releases something fragrant, bitter at first, then soft, then rich. You pause to inhale the scent. It reminds you of how your spirit's been changing. Once you longed for things, bright, sparkling things, approval, comfort, success, belonging. Your shelves used to be filled with scrolls that talked about 10 ways to be better, how to win hearts and the path to prosperity. Now you crave stillness. The clamor of the world, its applause, its anxieties, Its constant offerings feels like background noise you no longer dance to. Something in you has shifted. Deeply. The words of Romans 12:2 ring quietly within you. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. It's not just scripture anymore, it's experience. A lived reality. Back in the day, biblical marketplaces were everything vibrant, loud, filled with spices, cloth, gossip, and news. People flocked to them not just to buy, but to belong. Status was woven into what you wore and who noticed. But lately, you feel like a stranger in that crowd. It's not that you don't care at all. It's just the world's shine has dulled. You're not tempted by every new thing. You're no longer driven by the need to be seen praised or included. Instead, you find joy in the quietest moments the way candlelight flickers, while you pray the hum of the well rope, creaking in the morning the scent of fresh flatbread. This isn't depression. This is detachment. God is peeling things off of you, layers of identity you didn't realize were not your own. There's a curious tradition mentioned by some scholars about ancient Nazirite vows. When someone dedicated themselves fully to God, they abstained from wine, cutting their hair, and even approaching dead bodies. It was a total separation, not just from sin, but from distractions. Some historians believe this vow made the person socially awkward, even avoided. Others say they were honored. Either way, their lives were different, deeply different. You feel that now. You're not quite normal anymore. Friends talk about the latest trends, and you quietly excuse yourself to go pray. Someone jokes about your simplicity, but you wear it like a cloak of peace. You've stopped explaining yourself. You've stopped needing to be understood. Because you know where God is leading you requires fewer attachments, not more. It's like this: your life used to be a crowded table. Full plates, loud laughs, so many voices. And now God is clearing the table. Not to leave you empty, but to set it for something holy. You smile at the irony how many of your old dreams looked so big, but left you feeling so small. How the parties were loud, but your soul always left quieter. How the goals you chased kept moving like shadows on the wall. And now, stillness is the goal. Obedience is the ambition. Peace is the prize. You laugh softly, remembering how you used to pray for God to change your life, not knowing He'd start by making it quieter, or that He'd take away the very things you thought you needed only to show you what was sacred. There's an old fringe belief from ancient Near Eastern shepherds. Some claimed that sheep who wandered the most weren't disobedient. They were the ones with the best scent of the shepherd. So they followed it, even when others stayed put. You think of yourself that way now. Not rebellious, not confused. Just drawn by the scent of something better. Drawn by truth, because lately you've stopped being satisfied with half-truths. You can't ignore the little checks in your spirit. You don't scroll past blasphemy like you used to. You don't go along to get along. You ache for what's real. You crave what's eternal. Even if it means saying no to things that used to define you. A close friend once said, "You've changed," and for the first time you didn't rush to soften the moment. You just smiled and said, "Yes, I'm supposed to," and that answer stayed with you. Because deep change doesn't ask for permission. It simply arrives and rearranges the furniture of your soul. You know now your detachment isn't a loss, it's an awakening. You've stopped loving the world's flattery because you've tasted God's truth. You've stopped chasing the spotlight because you've found Him in the shadows. And maybe the biggest shift, you don't just believe in God anymore. You belong to Him. That's why the world feels foreign, because it is. You're a citizen of another kingdom. And as you grind the olives one last time, watching the oil shimmer in the light, you whisper the verse again. Be transformed. And this time, you know you already are. The fire pit crackles softly as you sit with your knees tucked beneath you, a thin wool cloak wrapped loosely around your shoulders. The sky overhead darkens into indigo pierced by the first shy stars, and for a moment the world feels still like it's listening. You think back to earlier today. It was ordinary at first, fetching water, sweeping the path, preparing lentils, but then it happened. That small, sacred moment that didn't make sense at the time. A stranger smiled at you longer than expected. A vendor at the market quoted a verse you'd whispered just this morning. A friend, distant for years, sent word with a message so timely, it felt like God had folded it into the breeze Himself. You're learning this. God doesn't just call you out of the world. He calls you into something. And one of the clearest signs that you are being set apart is this. He begins to surround you with others who are chosen too. You don't always meet them in temples or synagogues or churches for that matter. Sometimes they show up online, in line at the well, during a quiet walk. They're not always loud, polished, or obvious, but you'll know them, because something in their spirit touches yours, like flint striking flint. As iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. Proverbs 27:17. That verse isn't just poetic, it's prophetic. Because chosen ones don't thrive in isolation forever. God sends reinforcements, allies, witnesses, others who've seen what you've seen, others who've been broken, stripped down, and then quietly rebuilt by grace. Sometimes their stories echo your own. I lost everything before I found real peace. I thought I was crazy, until God showed me I wasn't alone. There's a tradition among early Judean believers not widely known about secret gatherings called salt circles. In times of persecution, small groups would meet in caves or under fig trees. Instead of speaking openly, they'd lay a ring of salt on the ground, simple, sacred, and share what God had whispered to them that week. No titles, no sermons, just presence and truth. Historians still debate whether this was literal or symbolic, but either way the image remains. God draws His chosen ones together quietly, precisely, purposefully. And when you meet them, something in you exhales. You don't have to explain why the world feels off, why crowds tire you, why your priorities have shifted. They already know. You joke about how many friends you've lost, and they nod, smiling, me too. You talk about how your dreams have died, and they say, mine had to too. You confess that you miss who you used to be, and they remind you that version of you wasn't built to carry what God is preparing. It's like discovering a language you forgot you knew, and sometimes, though not always, one of them becomes a mentor. Not by position, but by presence. They don't try to fix you or outshine you. They just walk beside you, gently, steadily, like how Elijah found Elisha, or how Mary greeted Elizabeth and the baby inside her leaped with recognition. You feel it. Not competition. but confirmation. You laugh more freely with them. You pray more boldly. You begin to see your own reflection more clearly in the way they reflect God's love back to you. There's a quirky belief among desert tribes that when camels find water after days of wandering, they don't drink immediately. First, they breathe near the surface, slowly, deeply. It's as if they're memorizing the scent of life itself. That's what these encounters feel like. A spiritual inhale, a holy recognition, and here's something tender not every chosen one you meet will stay. Some pass through like travelers with shared maps. Others stay for a season long enough to remind you who you are. And a few, a precious few, will walk beside you for the rest of your journey. But all of them leave a mark. They remind you that God doesn't just call individuals. He builds remnant communities, quiet clusters of light, scattered lanterns in the night. And just when you think you're too weary, too lonely, or too strange to keep going, someone arrives. They don't say you're chosen. They don't have to. Their presence says it all. So tonight, as the stars multiply above you, you think of the ones God has already sent. Maybe you've met them. Maybe you haven't. But you know they exist, and they are searching too, just like you. You whisper a small prayer into the wind, God, connect me to those you've chosen, and teach me to walk with them in grace. Then, with a grin, you add, and maybe let one of them have decent cooking skills, because chosen or not, a good flatbread is still a blessing. You stand and stretch the wool cloak slipping down your arms. You feel lighter. Not because your burdens are gone, but because now you know they're shared. You are not alone. Not now. Not ever. Somewhere, someone is praying a similar prayer. Somewhere, someone is waking up to the same divine ache. And one day, paths will cross. Eyes will meet. Spirits will know. And the journey, it won't feel quite so long anymore. You rise early. The sky is barely blue, still draped in soft shadows and lavender light. The village hasn't stirred yet. Not the donkeys, not the merchants, not even the children who usually race down the road like wind chimes on legs. You step outside with a woven basket on your hip, heading toward the olive grove. It's quiet except for the morning breeze and the gravel crunching beneath your sandals. And even that quiet it feels, deeper than silence. It feels sacred. Because something inside you has shifted. Not loudly, not with a trumpet or angel chorus, but with a slow and steady unfolding, like the petals of a fig blossom, like the warmth of the coals long after the fire's gone out. God is doing something. And if you're honest, you can't quite explain it not to your neighbor, not to your sister, maybe not even to yourself. But the signs are there. You're starting to see through things, not just people or politics or problems, but through the world itself. The gloss is fading. The distractions don't distract. The noise doesn't reach as deep. You crave truth now, like bread, like breath. And maybe that's the most surprising thing of all, that God hasn't just drawn you away from something. He's awakening something inside you. The beginning of calling always feels like a quiet ache. Not pain, not quite, but a hunger. You find yourself whispering prayers for wisdom without even thinking. You walk through a marketplace and suddenly sense a heaviness in someone's spirit, and you just know to pray for them. Or you read a verse you've read 100 times, and suddenly it opens like a door. You understand it not just in your mind, but in your bones. That's what it feels like when spiritual gifts begin to awaken. Some call it discernment. Others call it insight. Whatever you call it, it's not you. It's Him, in you, with you, for you. You remember the verse now, to each one the manifestation of the Spirit is given for the common good. 1 Corinthians 12:7. It's not about being special, it's about being ready. And whether you feel ready or not, God equips the ones He chooses. Little by little, layer by layer, wisdom, discernment, knowledge, dreams, prophetic stirrings. And the funny thing is, it's often when you feel least qualified that the gifts begin to stir. That's the mystery of being chosen. It doesn't start with power, it starts with surrender. Back in the Bible era, when young disciples followed a rabbi, they weren't given scrolls or sermons first. They were given chores, tasks, time. The rabbi would simply say, "Follow me." And as they walked day after dusty day, they began to think like Him, speak like Him, respond like Him. That's still how it works. You don't earn spiritual gifts. You absorb them in intimacy with God. There's a curious scroll fragment found near the Dead Sea that some believe hints at early listening practices. Certain scribes would sit in silence for hours simply asking, "What does heaven want me to hear today?" Some scholars say it's metaphor. Others think it was literal discipline. Either way, the idea sticks. Listening precedes receiving. And lately, you've been listening more. Not just to the words of others, but to the whispers inside you. That still small voice that says, "This is truth," and the one that warns, "Not that way." Or even the one that simply says, "Wait." You're starting to recognize that voice. And here's where it gets real. Not everyone will understand this awakening in you. They'll call you too intense, too deep, maybe even too spiritual. They'll joke. You see signs in everything now. And you'll smile because you do. But you'll also know the difference between paranoia and discernment, between delusion and divine wisdom, because you've tasted the counterfeit before. And now you hunger for the real thing. And here's something else. The more you grow in your gifts, the more you'll realize how precious the truth is, and how rare. We live in a world where lies are currency, where deception is dressed up in virtue, and where half-truths are applauded like poetry. But you're no longer satisfied with soft lies. You want the kind of truth that costs something. You kneel beside an olive tree and press your hand into the soil. It's rich dark, a little damp from the morning mist. You close your eyes and whisper, "Lord, grow me where you've planted me," even if it's hidden, even if no one sees. Because here's what you know now. Being chosen isn't about platform. It's about preparation and the hunger for truth that burns inside you. That's the first flame of your calling. Maybe you'll be a teacher one day, maybe a prophet, maybe simply a presence that changes the spiritual temperature of every room you enter. But today, you are becoming, and that is holy. You rise, brush your hands against your tunic, and begin the walk home. The village is stirring now. The bread ovens are glowing, the roosters are loud and unnecessary, and someone already spilled figs in the street again. And yet, despite the noise, despite the mess, your spirit is calm. Because you've seen the signs. You've heard the whisper. You know who you are becoming, and it's beautiful. The sun has dipped below the hills, now leaving the sky in a hush of gold and plum. Inside your home, the lamp flickers against the clay wall, and the air smells faintly of thyme and warm oil. You lie down on the woven mat, pull the wool blanket over your shoulder, and rest your hand on your heart. It's beating slower now, steadier, because your spirit knows you're not lost. You're being led. Chosen ones aren't chosen for comfort. They're chosen for closeness. To walk beside God, to carry light in dark places, to listen when the world is loud. And tonight your soul has heard the call again, not in thunder, not in fire, but in stillness. You did not choose me, but I chose you. John 15:16. That verse whispers over you now like a lullaby. You may not know the full path ahead, but you know the one who walks it with you. And that is enough. So, breathe in. Let His presence fill the quiet spaces. Breathe out. Let every fear and doubt melt into the night. You are not alone. You are not abandoned. You are not forgotten. You are chosen. And even now, as your eyes begin to close, heaven is still watching, still working, still walking beside you. Rest in that.